Shalom and welcome to this week's Middle East Report. In this program today, we'll be looking at some of the big issues and some of the prophetic events facing Israel in 2021. Warm welcome to the program, and I have two very special guests joining me from Israel. They are David Silver, out of Zion Ministries, and his son, Stefan Silver. Guys, absolute pleasure to have you on today's Middle East Report. As you can see in the background, in my home. We're not able to be in the studios in London because of the COVID-19 restrictions. We're all getting very used to these new dynamics and new way of filming and recording programs, the challenge that all of us face in these COVID-19 times. I'll start off with you, David. It's great that you could join us today. Can you just give us a little bit of an update in what's been happening with Outer Zion Ministries and your focus right now as we enter this new year of 2021?
Yeah, sure. Shalom, Simon, and special shalom to all of the Revelation viewers. I've often been saying on these Zoom meetings, I used to Zoom around the world in airplanes and visit people face to face, but now I'm restricted just to Zoom meetings, but that's just the way it is. So we're doing our best, Simon, just to continue to send out news reports. And one of the things I'm really wanting to achieve in what I share in my news reports and my personal comments and the videos I send out during the week is just to encourage people to realize we are living in the end times, and this to get people to realize there's an urgency to share the gospel with our unsaved family and friends, whoever we can get the opportunity to share with. I think time is getting very, very short, and it's a time to speak up, but also it's a time to use wisdom, because I think, as everybody realizes, there's a lot of censorship coming in right now, so we need to use wisdom, but at the same time not to allow the enemy to induce fear to stop us doing what the Lord is calling us to do.
Excellent. And Stefan, great to have you on the Middle East Report. What's it like going on with your dad?
Yeah, it's great to be part of the program, Simon. Thanks for having me, and hi to all the viewers as well. And yeah, Dad and I have worked together in the past for a number of years. Then there was a period of time when, I was involved in some other things, but we're teaming up again now. And yeah, it's interesting seeing Dad at home, because he is usually zooming around the world, as he said. But he's been doing a lot of Zooms and a lot of meetings just as we're able to do them here and now. And yeah, we're looking forward to giving a good update about what's going on in Israel and what's been happening here recently.
Excellent. And can you give us an update as well, Stefan, that you are the pastor of Chem L Congregation, which is a messianic fellowship in Israel for Israelis, essentially, because it's all in Hebrew.
Yeah, so Chem L is a messianic congregation located in the central part of Haifa called Merkaz Kamel, which means the center of Haifa. It was planted about 10 years ago, just over 10 years ago, or 11 years ago, as a plant of a larger congregation, actually the congregation that Dad and Mum go to, Carmel Assemblies. And its main focus is really to be an indigenous Hebrew-speaking congregation that really focuses on being a home for Israelis to be able to worship the Lord, worship the God of Israel, Yeshua the Messiah, freely in a very Hebrew-orientated and Israeli context, a place where they can feel comfortable to bring their friends to, their family to, when they're evangelizing and reaching out to them. And so I've had basically my wife Karen and I have been part of Caramel ever since it was founded, but we've been in a pastoral role for the past 5 years now. And so by far the past year has been the most challenging. But we thank God for his grace.
Excellent. And Dave, what do you say are the big challenges and the big issues really facing Israel in 2021?
Well, for private people, I guess financial concerns. A lot of people are out of work. A lot of small businesses and even maybe medium-sized businesses have been shut down because of the lockdown. Just life for a lot of people is very, very challenging right now. We may talk about this later, Simon, but of course we've got an election coming up on the 4th in 2 years, on the 23rd of March, unless they change that. We're not sure what will happen with that, but we can discuss that a bit further on. And I think one of the major issues facing the nation right now is the fact that we don't have a solid government in place. Prime Minister Netanyahu and the cabinet are still basically there, but we're in a state of limbo. And again, with what's happening in America, there's a lot of tension with Iran, between America and Iran, Israel and Iran. There's activities going on up there in Syria on our borders. And I think the IDF, I would say, would be on very, very high alert for anything that Iran may decide to do to take advantage of just the in Hebrew we say balagan, which it means chaos. It really, Israel is politically in chaos, and so is the United States. So Iran obviously is no friend of either of our two nations. So anything can happen really at any time. So definitely very, very challenging times, Simon.
Absolutely. And Stefan, really the same question from you. From your perspective, what do you think are the big issues facing Israel in 2021?
Yeah, definitely the recovery from COVID. I think besides the health situation, which we see, there may be some light at the end of the tunnel already in that regard with the vaccines that are coming, that have already been delivered to Israel. And there's already been quite a significant vaccination process in place, taking place with the general population. But definitely the economic aspect of things, the fact it's tied in with the political situation, the fact that there's no approved budget for 2021. And again, like I said, that ties in with the political struggles that are taking place in the hallways of the Knesset and in other places around the country. Really has left Israel in I wouldn't say a vulnerable place, but definitely not in the stellar position that we were in about a year ago. Still, the fundamentals of the economy are very strong and are very good on a macro level, but internally, the microeconomics and obviously the situation in many households with a lot of hundreds of thousands of people being unemployed. Self-employed people with their businesses being shut down for extensive periods of time, months on end, literally, and receiving relatively small aid from the government. That's definitely going to be a major challenge in 2021 and beyond that, because the deficit that has been created from the economic damage from COVID is going to take years to recuperate from. So that's definitely one major aspect, I think. I think socially, Israel will rebound quite quickly. It's a very lively place, as you would know as well. And people are really looking forward to being able to get back to be with families. I think Netanyahu has set, I hope rightly so, Passover this year as the goal for being able to actually celebrate Passover again as families and with friends and extended family. Because last year that didn't take place. We all celebrated Passover in our homes, but we had Zoom-overs, as we called them. And so that's been the goal. So I think socially Israel will rebound relatively quickly. But then obviously the political side of things, we're going towards this next election. But to be honest, it doesn't look like much is going to change even in this election, this fourth election as well. And then that's going to have its effect on other aspects of the country as well. And then, like Dad was saying, there's the international relations that Israel has, which is obviously very much influenced by America. And what we see happening over in the East with Iran, with their continued intent and attempts to establish some kind of a forward operating base, if you could call it that, in Syria and southern Lebanon, using their proxies with Hezbollah and Assad and Hamas down south in Gaza. So we see that continuing to be a front that Israel has to deal with. And so I think that's going to probably be a major event around the Iranian deal, which doesn't really regard Israel directly, but Israel is very affected by it and influenced by it, and also influences a lot through the United States and through other countries, and obviously through other methods other than diplomacy as well. So I think those will be the focuses for the coming year.
And David, like itself, we're in a lockdown 3 with very tough measures because we have this variant strand of COVID-19, which is highly infectious. So we are looking at even more draconian measures being in place here in the UK. So what is the situation like, David, for you in Israel, and what restrictions you're having to face with?
Okay, well, I guess the major restriction is that we're not supposed to go more than 1 kilometer from our homes unless it's to buy food or for medical health purposes. Sport, any kind of sport, you're only supposed to be able to do that within walking distance of home. What they're trying to do, obviously, is stop people gathering together in large numbers. Coffee bars and restaurants have been closed since, I think, since the last lockdown back in August, whenever that was. Yeah, the schools were open until this week, I think, and this week all schools are closed again. I think, what about kindergartens? I think kindergartens.
Yeah, schools were open for 2 weeks, the first 2 weeks of September up until the Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and then they shut, and then they reopened again in November. I think it was November, or mid-November. But that was only a partial opening as well. It wasn't for all of the classes. And then that has shut down again, and now there is no educational system whatsoever except for youth who are at risk, who have special situations taking place, and the special education basically is the 2 exceptions to that.
So, sorry, David.
Yeah, well, Josie and I, we went out yesterday because we had things to do. We went a little bit further than we should have done, but both times I had to do a U-turn and find another way through the back streets because the main thoroughfare through Haifa was totally blocked with a traffic jam that was being caused by a major roadblock where police were checking everybody. That's probably the situation up and down the country. So the police are really, and they want us that they would enforce this lockdown much stronger than previous ones, and sadly the people that seem to be contravening it the worst would be the Haredim, or the ultra-Orthodox. Yesterday was a major skirmish between police and yeshiva students. Yeshiva is like a Jewish Bible school, you could say. In Ashkelon, they were supposed to be closed. They weren't closed. The police went in, and there was a real horrible confrontation went on. But you know, everywhere I go, people are pretty good. They're wearing most people are wearing their masks, and we do our best to keep our distancing. But there are particular areas where that's not the case. Some of the Arab villages and Arab towns are reluctant to abide by the regulations, and again, the ultra-Orthodox communities aren't following restrictions. Actually, I think 50% of the infections are in those 2 groups, Simon.
Yeah, definitely.
And Stefan, I mean, we were hearing reports in our media about how Israel is leading the world in terms of the vaccinations, that 2 million Israeli citizens have already received the first jab, as it were, of the Pfizer BioNTech, and Israel's leading the world. So can you explain how Israel is really so far ahead of every other kind of nation in the world in terms of getting the vaccine out for COVID-19?
Yeah, it's actually interesting. It is slightly controversial, the way that Israel has obtained so many vaccines, and Israel is obviously very diplomatic, and they have all kinds of innovative ways and creative ways of acquiring and obtaining what needs to be obtained. And we've actually seen that all the way through the crisis. It was the respiratory machines to begin with, and now the vaccines as well. Israel was able to secure contracts with all the major vaccine manufacturers. And the first ones to arrive have indeed been the Pfizer vaccines. The Moderna ones have also arrived in a smaller amount, but there'll be more of them coming as well. And yeah, I think the controversiality comes about just because it has come to the public's understanding, I believe, that the way Israel was able to obtain so many vaccines and obtain them so quickly was that basically Israel was pledged as a very large what do you call it? A test pool or a test case,
okay.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so Israel will be supplying Pfizer and probably Moderna and some of the other companies as well with information about the vaccines, about side effects, about the types of segments of population that have been that have received the vaccine and what has happened after that. But that being said, Israel really can't afford to be in a constant state of lockdown as it is, both economically, from a defense position as well. You know, there's been strong or heavy worry, I think, all along about you know, the IDF coming down with COVID and how that could potentially, you know, even cripple the army to an extent, and that is something that Israel just cannot live with. And so a lot of effort has been put in by the government to bring about these vaccines, both to obtain them, to bring them here, and to get as many of the population, as much of the population inoculated with vaccine as quickly as possible. One thing to remember as well, there is, again, a political motive here, and this is something that is spoken about widely here in Israel, and how the politicians are using it and manipulating it as best suits them in order to either try and remain in power or try and get in power. And so there is definitely you know, an awareness here that Netanyahu is doing all that he can to get as many people vaccinated as possible before the next election in March, because that is something that he can definitely put down as an achievement for him and something that can definitely benefit him in the election. So that's just another aspect to remember. So there's a lot of motivation from a lot of different aspects to get that happening. But that being said, Israel has done a good job in the operation so far, and people are already receiving the second dose or the second jab. And at the moment, there's a limitation of vaccines that have arrived, but there are more supposed to be arriving even within days or a few weeks, and probably by the end of February, end of March, there will be enough vaccines here for anybody under the age of 16 to be able to take the vaccine or receive the vaccine. So it is quite remarkable, and Israel is definitely leading the world by far in that regard.
And David, my final question on the COVID-19 crisis. I read today in the Times of Israel that Israel is to issue a green passport for all those people that have had the vaccine, together with those who've recovered from COVID-19, meaning that you won't be able to meet in big gatherings, won't go to big sporting arenas without this passport. Are you concerned with this?
I am, and several weeks ago now, I think Arut 7, one of the religious newspapers here, published an article saying that they won't make it mandatory here in Israel because the law doesn't allow that. But if you don't take the vaccine, you won't be able to buy, sell, or trade or travel, which sounds awfully like what we read about in Revelation 13. Now, I don't really believe we're quite at that point yet, but obviously, I really do believe we are moving towards that situation. Once they get this green passport in place, maybe just for some minor regulations, it would be very easy to extend that to the point where you can't travel, you can't go to the post office, maybe not even go to the supermarket without that passport. But having said that, there are, I'm reading that there still is no evidence or no proof that having had the vaccine will stop you from carrying the virus and spreading it to other people. And if that really is the case, then having that passport would be totally irrelevant. But anyway, you know, I know it's a very controversial subject in the body of Messiah around the world. Some call it conspiracy theories, and you know, there's a difference between a conspiracy theory and a conspiracy fact. We do read about a conspiracy in the Bible, in the book of Revelation. So there's definitely a conspiracy going on between the kingdoms, really. I mean, that's what we're really seeing as a clash of the kingdoms, and I believe we are getting very, very close to the climax of all that. You know, we're not right there, but it's accelerating. Even in the last few days, in the last 2 weeks since January the 6th, with that riot in the U.S. Capitol, things have accelerated unbelievably. So, you know, once they've got any kind of regulation in place, like that green passport, and I think other countries are watching what Israel's doing, and I've seen media reports that they are thinking of doing the same thing in the UK. I think a week or two ago there was a front page on the Daily Mirror. I said, "No jab, you're barred," which is a very dramatic statement, really. But that's what is in the minds of those who are in charge of the governmental departments in our nation. So that's I think we just have to be ready for that. But time will really tell, Simon.
Absolutely. And Stefan, I suppose the big impact or the big issue facing Israel in 2021 will be a change of US administrations, with looking very, very likely that Joe Biden will be inaugurated on the 20th of January as America's 46th president, bringing in the Democrats, unless we see an absolute miracle intervention before then, which will need to be the kind of Lazarus type miracle to actually take place. But what are your concerns with a Biden administration, knowing that President Trump and his administration were really, he was really Israel's best friend?
Yeah, by far, I think President Trump has been probably the most positively Israel-inclined president that we've seen. I think, at least in the history of the country, I think more than Bush and more than other Republicans before that, and really has done so much for Israel over his past 4 years as president. And definitely there is a lot of talk here. I think there's a lot of I don't know if I would use the word concern, maybe concern, and I think preparation from the Israeli government and whoever else is involved in influencing policy and things that are taking place here in Israel towards the Biden administration that will, I agree, most likely be inaugurated very shortly. And so I think there is a concern about that, and nobody knows really exactly what to expect right now. I think it's very clear to everyone that it's not going to be like it was under President Trump, that very strong support, the very drastic, positively drastic measures that Trump has taken and his very, very pro-Israel stance is not going to continue. It is going to be a drastic change there. I don't think it will retract back to the days of Obama, which is probably the opposite of that, but it probably will be somewhere in between. And I think it very much ties in with Israel's election here and what takes place. Who will be the next prime minister here in Israel? We don't know that. It could be Netanyahu. It may not be Netanyahu. Obviously, Netanyahu is a very savvy, seasoned politician. If he knew how to handle Obama the way that he did, and given the circumstances, I think that he handled that situation very well, and he handled Israel and Israel's foreign policy very well during that period of Obama's presidency for 8 years. I think he will be capable of withstanding anything that may come up with the Biden administration. But definitely the winds are changing, and I think we're going to feel that in various aspects.
And David, isn't there great concern now that a Biden administration will bring in the Palestinians from the cold, frozen out by the Trump administration for their refusal to engage in the peace process, their refusal to deal with the incitement in their education and the media, and initially supporting Palestinian terrorists in Israeli prisons by paying them a salary to support their families. So effectively rewarding terrorism, completely objecting and complaining about the Trump administration, and also the Islamic Republic of Iran with the talk of bringing Iran back into the fold and re-entering the United States back into the Iran deal.
Yeah, well, somebody said sometime back that a Biden-Harris administration would be like Obama on steroids. Yeah, it is a very scary thought, and you know, people that know me know that I'm fairly right-wing orientated, but you know, Biden and Harris are definitely, and the Democrats are definitely left-wing liberals, and Mahmoud Abbas, you know, the head of the Palestinian Authority, has been in contact with Biden and the Democrats right from the time, I think, of the election, if not before, because he knows. I think he knows he's got a much more friendly ear with the Democrats than he had with President Trump and the Republicans. So, you know, I think there is a lot of concern, and you know, Bibi may not have said it, but Benjamin Netanyahu may not have said it, but I think you know, the right-wing Israelis were all rooting for a Trump win in that election, but of course it hasn't happened, and it's not what we want to see going on. And I don't think it bodes well for the Palestinian situation, for the settlements, even for and more importantly, actually, I think the most serious situation is the Iranian nuclear program. And you know, Obama and probably even the UK politicians still think that that nuclear deal that Obama and the nations went into with Iran was good, but it was only Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump that really spoke out against it, and finally Trump, you know, pulled America out of it. You know, Iran hasn't changed its spots, and it's a serious menace, you know, to the Middle East, to Israel, to the Middle East. Which is probably why we're seeing those nations like UAE and Bahrain and others, even perhaps Saudi Arabia, at some stage in the future, siding with Israel and wanting to improve relationships with Israel because, you know, they're concerned about Iran. So the thing is, I really think that Biden and Harris, they don't have a realistic understanding or perspective on what's happening in the Middle East or really anywhere in the world, because they have this liberal left-wing delusion, and that's where they're coming from. So it's definitely not good news. But you know, having said all that, and as much as most evangelical believers who really believe the Bible and are watching, you know, through prophetic eyes, don't like what's going on, you know, had it been different, had Trump won, that probably would have slowed down the end time process. And there's one video I watched about this Great Reset, which is a new name for the New World Order. Basically, they said that a Biden-Harris administration will be like a turbo. It'll speed up dramatically. It'll speed up end time events. And you know, the Bible says we're supposed to be hastening the day of the Lord's return. So I think maybe some of these people, some of the prophetic ministries may have got it wrong in thinking or seeing things the way we want to see things pan out, rather than really praying into God's plans and purposes. But again, we'll just see what happens between now and the 20th. God may turn that around, but the thing we always have to remember is, you know, God does not lose control. As much as we may not like it, he says all authority comes from him. No one has authority unless he gives it. So his ways are higher than our ways. Maybe some of us got it wrong.
I'm pleased you raised those issues, David, because I mean there are so many Christians who think that if you do X, Y, and Z, then God will do the following. But he's God, he's sovereign, and sometimes, I mean, particularly for Christian Zionists around the world, that what President Trump and his administration have done in defending Christian freedoms, in defending Israel, in confronting evil, as in the Iranian regime, and even bringing North Korea to the negotiating table, and also fighting against abortion and other social issues. It's something that I think all of us who care about the Bible actually long to see, but that's what makes it so difficult to then deal with a democratic administration that is so extreme in its kind of secularist, humanistic ideology, and that is, I think, where we are, that they will speed up moves towards globalism, and God is in control. So you know, we have to trust Him, don't we?
Yeah, and personally, I don't like seeing the bad guys win. You know, I don't like seeing bad guys win. But you know, when I read Matthew 4 and Luke 21, which are, you know, at least moving into the time of sorrows, I don't see a reversal. I don't see things getting better. I see things getting worse and worse and worse. I don't mean to be a Jeremiah, but we need to be realistic. And if we really are in such a late time as we think we are, and if the coming of the Lord is really getting close, we need to be, and that, you know, again, we need to be ready for what's coming down the pipe, because it may be coming on us much faster and much sooner than what a lot of people are aware of.
And Stefan, I mean, one big concern really with a Biden-Harris administration, and it's only really a question of time to consider how long Joe Biden will be president for, knowing that Kamala Harris is waiting in the wings and was the most extreme senator in the Senate, surrounded by people that absolutely hate Israel. So her as a president would be a very frightening prospect, not only for us, but particularly for Israel. So what are your concerns for the Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria with Biden's plan to push forward or push through the two-state solution?
Yeah, so I mean, like we said before, Israel has enjoyed you know, a lot of freedom and support over the past 4 years from the Trump administration on all kinds of different issues, and obviously the Jewish towns and cities in Judea and Samaria being one of them as well. Also, the current government that we have is a right-wing government. Netanyahu, his ideology is in that direction as well, and then that's reinforced by the religious parties that sit with him, and then obviously lobby and put their pressure in order to extending the building and you know, taking more land and what it may be in Judea and Samaria. Yeah, I think, you know, we see this happening now again. France and Germany are calling for Israel to go back to the 1960 or pre-1967 borders, which would exclude all of Judea and Samaria. We've been seeing this all along, but the marking of products that come out of Judea and Samaria, Israeli products that are manufactured there, beyond the green line, as they would call it, in Judea and Samaria, are marked extensively in Europe in order to try and you know, boycott those businesses that, as they would see it, are operating in illegally occupied territories. What's always funny about those you know, people that do it is that there's just a real fundamental misunderstanding of what's actually taking place on the ground. On the one hand, with the Arab or Palestinian population that live in the towns and cities in Judea and Samaria, many of them either work in Israel legally or illegally, or they work in Israeli or Jewish you know, factories or businesses that are run, establishments that have their manufacturing locations in Judea and Samaria, and they are so much better off working there or in Israel than they would be if that wasn't the case. Moreover, the reality on the ground is very complex. The Jewish towns, the Jewish towns and cities as well, the Arab Palestinian towns and cities are really interwoven with each other. I mean, they're literally one wadi across from another. And so, you know, there is a lot of talk about about trying to find some kind of a solution that would somehow separate the land. And it's been going on for decades and decades. I personally am not, there could be a lot of pressure to prevent additional building and additional land acquisitions by Israel. That's one side of it. But actually, for Israel to give up that land and to be able to remove the cities and the very large towns, tens of thousands of people, I think is not something that will happen very easily. Even though it has happened in the past, the Gaza disengagement in 2005, I believe Judea and Samaria is slightly different. I think it would probably take, a very large event, a crisis of some kind, a very large scale war, perhaps, something like COVID style, not necessarily a virus, but something of that magnitude, in order to be able to change the situation on the ground because of the way everything is on the ground there. But not to say that is impossible. I think that the situation on the ground really is so complex, it's so complicated, that I'm not sure that there's even a possible human solution for what is taking place there. But that's not to say, when looking at it from a spiritual point of view, we read about the peace plan that will happen with Israel and its neighbors, I believe, in the region and possibly even the entire world. We read about that in Daniel 9. The Antichrist, we don't know who that is yet. That person hasn't been revealed yet. But possibly within the framework of something that large, then we could see things changing on the ground. So while there probably will be pressure, there probably will be a much more vocal what do you call it? Vocal resistance, opposition to what is taking place, to additional building and things like that in Judea and Samaria. I'm not sure how much more than that we'll actually see happening. Even though there might be a lot of talk about it, I don't think that we'll actually see anything happening on the ground.
And David, on to the issue of Iran. This is incredible. This is the European Union we're talking about here. That today the EU warns that Iran's enrichment of uranium is up to 20%, which is a matter of deep concern. So we talk about the incoming Biden administration wanting to renew the Iran deal, known as my notes here, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. But Iran have completely ignored this agreement. They are continue to ramp up their uranium production, and they're only one step away from having the nuclear bomb. So this is something that is going to be a pressing issue on Biden's desk. We know Israel's situation, that we've seen the assassination back in November of 2020 of Iran's chief nuclear scientist. Israel won't tolerate the Iranian regime having nuclear weapons. We see the massive buildup of American military hardware in the Middle East, on the Persian Gulf. So could we see that Joe Biden would actually take military action to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons, or do you think he'll completely back out and cave in, allowing Iran, the most dangerous regime in the world, to have the world's most dangerous weapon?
Yeah, I think the biggest problem with liberal left-wing people is they work on the assumption that everybody else thinks like them, and if they're nice to the Iranians or the bad guys will be nice to us. But that's not the reality. And the thing is, without naming names, the bad guys, instead of seeing that kind of generous attitude towards them as being benevolent, they see it as a weakness, and they take advantage of it. And again, the situation is the same for Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu has been very strong standing against Iran, but a liberal left-wing Israeli government would be probably just as foolish as a liberal left-wing American government, because they really don't think that these guys are serious and meaning harm. But I think if we're really realistic about it, they really are. And it's probably one of the factors behind that, of course, is their religious ideals. They can't live with the thought of Israel being on on land that once belonged to the caliphate. So, I mean, there's no doubt about it. Iran is very, very serious about establishing nuclear weapons. I mean, Israel proved that we pulled off probably the most amazing espionage coup of all time when we sent a team in at night and took out into their nuclear archive building in Tehran, I believe it was, and took out 50,000 CD-ROMs of all of their stored up information on the nuclear program. They got them out, they brought them back. Prime Minister Netanyahu presented it to the world. So there's no doubt about it that Iran was working under the table. They were working against the principles of that agreement with the Americans and the other nations. They've been cheating all the way along. They simply can't be trusted. However, again, a liberal left-wing government in America and Israel probably won't see it that way. So it's a very dangerous situation. But maybe again, maybe that's the way God is working this thing out.
No, absolutely. And Stefan, the other kind of major news as of the recording of this program, that Mike Pompeo, the Trump's US Secretary of State, has come out and said that Al-Qaeda has a new home and a base in Iran that is threatening the region and also the Abraham Accords. And this is what he said. He said that Al-Qaeda has a new home base. It is the Islamic Republic of Iran. As a result, bin Laden's wicked creation is poised to gain strength and capabilities. We ignore this Iran-Al-Qaeda nexus at our peril. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's not surprising that things like that are going to happen. We're going to see more merging. I think we see it on one side. We see the more moderate, more modern Islamic nations that are coming together, actually normalizing their relationships with Israel, signing peace deals, and that's all happening on one side, and therefore the same reaction, same or equal or greater reaction on the other side is going to be, forces that oppose Israel also coming together in order to try and create a stronger front against Israel, create more pressure on Israel, create more pressure internationally as well. I think Israel has just absolutely amazing and superior capabilities in terms of intelligence and the ability to operate far from Israel's borders. Dad was mentioning a few of those operations beforehand. Just last night, fighter jets attacked several targets in Syria. A number of Syrian militants and Iranian militants were killed. That's happening, probably every couple of weeks, and it has been for the past several years. Every few weeks there's another attack. Sometimes it can be weeks where they're consecutive nights where we wake up in the morning here and we read that there was, an attack in a certain area of Syria, and we know that that's the same axis that's all operating together. It's Iran with Al-Qaeda, with ISIS, with Assad and his regime in Syria, with Hezbollah, that really have all of Lebanon on puppet strings and basically handle and command that entire country, unfortunately. And then Gaza down south, Hamas, it's all part of the same proxy. We could see more significant activity because of that and strengthening of Al-Qaeda. It's actually kind of interesting because the several times where Iran have tried to retaliate against Israel because of operations that Israel has done, when Israel has taken out several key figures of the Iranian regime, both military and civilian, and carried out attacks at different targets that Iran had established, military weapon depots in Syria. The retaliations have actually been very weak, not what you would expect from Iran. You would expect something that was better organized, more efficient, that had some kind of a real tally at the end. But in the end, there was maybe 4 people out in the field that sent a drone that was shot down, and nothing really happened from that, or a few missiles that came in but didn't hit anything. They were intercepted in the air. And so, a lot of times when the dogs bark, that they don't actually bite, and they actually bark because they can't bite, or they know that their bite isn't going to be very significant. And I think that is somewhat the case with Israel. Everybody knows what Israel's capabilities are. Everybody knows that Israel has nuclear weapons and very, very, very strong military capabilities. That is why I think Iran is trying to obtain a nuclear weapon as well, because it's going to give them a lot more leverage than what they actually have now, which is not a lot, to be honest. And that's at least what we see in the attempts to retaliate. And so, like I said, Al Qaeda connecting again with or connecting, teaming up with Iran, we could see more intensive attacks against Israel. But I think Israel is a couple of steps ahead most of the time, and I think that's part of God's grace upon this nation. And ultimately, all these world forces, people are connecting together, and just like we read in the Psalms, that the enemies of Israel convene together and speak about destroying Israel, and that the name of Israel will not be remembered anymore, and he who sits in the heavens laughs. And that's what I always remind myself, that there's all these world leaders and powers and terror organizations and whatever it is that they have and are trying to do. Ultimately, he who sits in the heavens laughs, because ultimately it's going to be God and his purposes that are carried out here on earth, and that those plans and purposes can't go forward and won't go forward without the nation of Israel and the people of Israel in the land of Israel. And so I'm very confident in that.
Absolutely. You give us so much hope there. I appreciate that, Stefan. And we're down to the last 10 minutes of the program. So, David, can you share with us about the Israeli general election? This is what, as you said earlier in the program, the fourth general election in 2 years. So the Israeli public must be sick and tired of this, as well as COVID-19. The thought of going to the polls again on March the 23rd. Do you think that Bibi Netanyahu can win another general election and maintain his hold on power over the nation of Israel? And who could be his coalition partners? Or do you see that the party of the left could do much better this time round?
Well, what's happening, of course, has been a lot of party shifting. There's a couple of leaders have resigned, and there's several new parties. I think even another new party opened up today. There's already too many anyway, which is our problem, is that the votes are spread too thin. So at the moment, there's a lot of shuffling and changing going on. And I think Stefan said it before, I'm not sure that the result of this next election will be any different. What really has to happen, Israelis have to change their voting habits, and that doesn't happen very easily. I got the sense that probably Prime Minister Netanyahu has had his day. It's not looking good for him. His own party has lost, Likud party has lost quite a lot of members to Gideon Saar, who was one of Prime Minister Netanyahu's close aides, right up there, very close. He was a government minister, so he started a party called New Hope, Tikva Hadashah, and he's taken a lot of people with him, and maybe even will vote for him, because I think Bibi perhaps has let the team down, over the last, the last couple of years. So, and I see that just in the last week or so, Benny Gantz, who was previously the coalition partner of Bibi, he went out trying to solicit the agreement with a lot of other politicians, and virtually nobody contacted him. So I think he may have I think his political career may well be over. And ultimately, again, God will raise up who he wants to raise up. But I personally don't think, I think we've seen the end of Prime Minister Netanyahu, and I don't know an awful lot about Gideon Saar. Maybe Stefan knows more, but he looks okay to me. And as I said, we may even end up voting for him. We weren't going to go even bother. The thing that really bugs me about the election is if these politicians want to play silly games like that, let them do it. But the problem is it costs millions or even billions of shekels to hold an election, and then we got people, out of work and people under the poverty line. The country can't afford this foolishness. But we're heading for this fourth election, so we really do need to pray that there will be a definite outcome and a solid government from this fourth election. So maybe that's what the viewers can be praying for the next 2 months.
Oh, absolutely. And because we're coming to the end of the program, Stefan, what would you say are the challenges facing the Messianic Jewish community in Israel in 2021?
That's a good question. I think as we start to exit this COVID crisis, or should I say, while we're still in the COVID crisis, which has been going on for a good 10, 11 months already. Really, it's I think for the Messianic community, it's really maintaining the community during these final months. Hopefully, it will be the final months of this crisis. What we've seen is a lot of just so much restriction, and basically the inability to meet as communities, as congregations for so long already. There was a period of a few months during the summertime where it was possible to meet up to about 50 people, but not whole communities, and not everybody did that. And even then, there were a lot who didn't want to meet because of the virus and the dangers that came with it, the risks that came with it. So there's a lot of challenges around maintaining community during COVID, and I think it's been a real storm, COVID-19, for the whole world. It's been a huge crisis, and these crises, when there's a big shaking like that, it exposes two things. It exposes the weaknesses, but it also exposes where you're strong. It exposes where you're weak, and it exposes where you're strong. And so I think during 2021, as we exit this crisis, it's going to be rebuilding, the communities. Basically just getting used to being with each other again. I mean, we haven't been with each other for so long, and now we're looking at this and saying, oh, we're longing to be together and to meet together and to be congregations and communities again together. I think we forget that comes with other challenges as well. So it's going to take some time to probably get used to that again, even though that's obviously all of our heart's desire and something that we're looking forward to very, very much. And then really, I think looking at the weaknesses that COVID has exposed, some of them may be, what do we do during extensive periods of crisis when we can't meet together? And how do we still maintain community? And how do we still maintain teaching the word of the Lord and the word of God, and studying it together and worshiping together, being able to do the things that we can do? So, we've done certain things in our congregation. Other congregations have done similar things and other things that are different. And then also seeing, what are our strengths? What have we seen has really helped us to push through this time? And then really putting a lot more emphasis on that and reinforcing those things even more, so that when the next crisis comes, and the next crisis will come, it's only a matter of time and what exactly will it look like, that those pillars that allow us to remain strong in the Lord can continue to be strong. I think that's definitely a challenge. Obviously, the financial challenges are there as well. A lot of people within the Messianic community have lost jobs, have been put on unpaid leave, and then that directly affects the congregation's donors overseas. Same story there. And so that also affects a lot of the ministries and congregations in Israel that are heavily dependent upon external support. So I think those will be some of the challenges that we're going to see in 2021 from the Messianic community, or within the Messianic community. But the Lord is for us, and therefore no one and no thing can be against us. And so we're really continuing to place our faith and our trust in Him.
Amen to that, Stefan. And David, what would you say? What role can our Christian viewers play in supporting Israel and supporting the Messianic Jewish community in Israel in these, what I can only describe as extremely dark times?
Sure. Well, the simple answer to that is pray. Just keep us in prayer. Show solidarity with the believers here in Israel. And as Stefan just said, we do have financial needs. So as the Lord leads and makes it possible, it would be good for financial support to continue coming through somehow. We had a lot of people visiting the congregations in service, and they would bring offerings, and that really supported the congregation. But that hasn't been happening since March, really. But the main thing again is just pray. And just, really just to answer the question you just asked, Stefan, I would say one of the biggest challenges facing the Messianic community is unity. And sadly, even now we're seeing disunity over the COVID, over whether we should take vaccines or not. There's just as there is outside of the body, even inside the body, there are these opposing perspectives, and some people get very what's the word? They get overzealous about what they believe in. So unity would be unity for the people, and maybe wisdom for the leadership in how to move ahead in 2021.
And Stefan, with 30 seconds, do you have a message to our viewers watching this program from home who long to be in Israel, long to be with the Jewish people, and like myself, dearly miss the land of Israel?
Yeah, well, I would say that we're looking forward to having you back here as soon as possible, and having you visit Israel, and having you be here and travel around the congregations and meet the people, and show your support in that way as well. I think like Dad said, and it's interesting, even when we sing the Tikva, the Israeli national anthem, it speaks about the eyes looking towards Zion, and I think that takes place in the hearts of many Christian believers around the world as well, that the eyes of so many of you are focused and looking towards Zion, because that is the epicenter of everything that's taking place today. That is the place where the Lord is preparing to return, and that's really where a lot of your heart is. Not all of your heart, but a lot of your heart is there. And so we are thankful for that. We're grateful for that, and we just want to thank you for your continued prayers and your continued support and solidarity with Israel in general, and with us as Messianic believers in Israel particularly.
Amen. It's a pleasure. Stefan and David, absolute pleasure to have you both on this home edition of the Middle East Report, and I have to remind our viewers to keep you both and your ministries very much in our prayers during these very difficult and dark times, as we see the approaching of the coming Lord coming much quicker than many of us could possibly expect. So thank you so much for joining me on the Middle East Report.
Shalom.
Thank you, Simon.
And I just want to thank you all for watching this program today. It's so important that as Christians, we show our love, our support to the Messianic Jewish community in Israel, because they need our support, they need our prayers, and they are the body of Messiah in the nation of Israel. So I want to thank you for watching this prophetic overview of looking at some of the key issues affecting and facing Israel in 2021.